desiblitz.com.
Welcome everyone that's joined us so far. Okay, right. So, let's. Okay, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Priya. It's so lovely to be here today. We're joined by the wonderful Indian graphic novel artist Amrita Patel, and you guys also have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the session. So please do use the chat function to get those questions through. We want this to be as interactive as possible. We don't want just me talking to you or Amrita. We want you guys to get completely involved with this. So this event is part of Desi Blitz Literature Festival, which has been created to support authors and creative writers with a South Asian background and has events running until October the 1st. So if you haven't seen the rest of the calendar, please do visit desiblitz.com to see who else we have in store for you. As in previous years, the festival celebrates the work of established writers and provides opportunities for new voices to be more widely heard. So about our wonderful Amrita. Okay, so if you try to categorize this creative as one thing, it would be incredibly difficult. So, and why would you? She's a force that has shaken up female Indian literature with her dynamic themes and completely goes against the grain of what's expected of a South Asian female creative. Thank you so much, Amrita, for joining us today. How are you?
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting me. And in this strange time, I'm happy that we get to interface like this, if not in person.
Absolutely. Yeah. So tell me, where are you in the world right now?
I am actually at a pit stop somewhere in Morocco where I'm on an artistic residency for 5 weeks. So wow. You have no idea what crocodiles I have fought and what streams I have crossed in order to reach here to be online right now.
Oh, so incredible. Yeah. Okay, well, it was so lovely to have you today. So let's start from the beginning. Okay, so we know your first major work was Kari, a graphics novel which explores sexual identity and has the first queer leads in Indian literature. So it's a first of its kind, really, and also the first in the world of Indian graphic novels. Okay, so how did your audience in India actually take this? Was it censored? Was it welcomed? Like how was it when you first released this book?
So just to set the record straight, there was Sarnath Banerjee who did a graphic novel before me. So I'm not the first, but definitely the first woman, and yes, a queer protagonist in this form for sure. How did my audience respond? Now, it was a bit of a wild card entry debut. Nobody was waiting breathlessly for it. Basically, it appeared quietly and it was released into the world to the credit of my publishers with a great deal of grace. You know, it was not billed as a queer book. It was not billed as it was not labeled. And I think that has actually been an advantage because the fact of not being labeled either by genre or content meant that I kind of insidiously made my way into a lot of people's reading list. Mm-hmm. And Kari's popularity has been slow blossoming. It's been a late bloomer.
Right.
So it has become a bit of a phenomenon in time, not immediately when it came out. And I kind of missed the total social media boat. Like it was a bit before the boom of that.
Sure.
So it was a quiet entry. It was not received with censorship because who reads graphic novels really? Not the kind of people that want to put muzzles on other people, you know.
Sure.
So it was a gentle start, and it has found its people slowly over time.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think the fact of the matter is that this conversation, this dialogue about LGBTQ and just, exploration of sexuality is something that's only been accepted of recent times. I think it's something, like you said, it's happened over time, and it's quite rightly so that this was probably going to be a product of these times, really. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of being a female South Asian artist, do you feel that you have a role to play in these people's lives for being a voice for this demographic, especially the LGBTQ community?
So when Kari came out, you have to remember that India, it was before the Pride parades, it was before Section 377 was knocked down and so on and so forth. But to be entirely honest, there was no zeitgeist really. I was not writing this book to serve a purpose. It was a story that I needed to tell, and I told it the best way that I could. It is in time that I realized that there were many other people that probably needed resonance of characters that did not neatly fit some sort of bill,
Yeah.
Queer in more ways than one, let's just put it. Even the medium is queer. Comics are a definitely queer medium.
Yeah.
Do I see myself as having a role? I see that I need my in interrogations for whatever work that I'm doing to be authentic and to be as 100% as I am able to be at that moment. In being that, I know that there will always be people that are affected by it. There will be people that will be moved by it. I don't. I will not self-aggrandize in any fashion other than that, but I do know that if your inquiries are sincere, they do move people along the way. Yeah.
Okay. So
and with my latter work, I definitely felt that with the work that dealt with mythology and Indian traditions, there was a need for outlier characters and people that are not bigoted to be telling the story. So in that sense, I did see a sense of responsibility with that kind of storyteller.
Okay, right. That leads me on to your other work. So, so you've got two novels that surround the Mahabharata, right? So this could be described as literally the most famous tale in Indian literature. So this is quite a bold move for yourself as a writer to say, right, I'm going to take on this and I'm going to give it my own take, so to speak. What kind of moved you to make that bold move, really?
So, Priya, the truth is that it may appear like an incongruous thing to go from a queer urban story to things that are deep diving in mythology. But actually speaking, for me, it was more organic than that. Like, in a sense, with Kari, I had told a tale that was utterly personal, very close to the skin. And in telling the other stories, which are everybody's stories, it was, in a sense, turning the gaze outward. So it was not, it was literally the next step for me to grow in an evolutionary fashion. In terms of retelling stories from the Mahabharata, that is very much in keeping with the way tellings were done. Like we always have, Tulsidas, we have like Ramcharitmanas, we have like Jnaneshwar's. Basically, it has always been people commenting upon the text. That itself is not it's not a very original thing to do. What is perhaps different is the medium that was utilized and the fact that I myself probably am not in keeping with the kind of storyteller that sat and held forth,
I mean, when you think about the Mahabharata, even like if you look back to the 80s sequel, of very lavish, very, it was just a beautiful, epic series, wasn't it? So when you pair that with artistic flair and you pair it with your take in terms of your dialogue between the characters and the kind of artwork behind it, it almost it revives the story in a way, because as you said, some authors kind of tell their way of the story, but this gives a whole different dynamic. Some people that don't know how, find it hard to describe the Mahabharata to others, they pick up this novel and they're able to kind of make head and sense out of the actual story. So you have two narratives in the two books that you've got, two books surrounding the Mahabharata. Tell me about the narration, because one is the River Ganga and the other one is Ashwatthama. Now, the reason I bring this up is because Ashwatthama was the son of Guru Drona, and he was on the baddie side, let's say. He was fighting alongside Duryodhan, and it's his take of what happens after the battle, which I found incredibly interesting. So tell us about that. Why did you use Ashwatthama as your narrative?
So in all my work, and that holds true from book 1 to book 4, one thing that is in common, and it ends up being like that, is that they're all told by outlier narrators. All the narrators are a little bit not off the accepted mold, as it were.
Sure.
To me, okay, so what I've done is I've far from touched the entire Mahabharata. Adi Parva and Sauptik deal just like a tapestry. I have taken some threads that were of interest to me or were of interest to the preoccupations that my life was about at that point. And their tapestry is one of those threads. So I see Adi Parva as being a feminine book. I see Sauptik as being a masculine book. There's one blue book. There is one red book. There is one book which is about births. It's about mothers. It's about, there's these powerful queens that sort of dominate Adi Parva's narrative. Sauptik is much more about masculinity. It's about the Great War, which of course everybody knows about. But to have the story of a great war told from the viewpoint of a man that is not heroic in his masculinity, but broken and flawed. Yeah. I thought that itself was an act of, in some ways, transgression, but also honest exploration of issues that doesn't happen when you take like a typical classic cookie cutter mold kind of hero. You can't be telling stories in that fashion and have anything new come up.
In terms of like criticism surrounding the books and the way you've told the story, have you faced any?
For sure. I mean, Adi Parva and Sauptik, both of them touch stories that everybody feels a great sense of kinship with. Like, it belongs to everybody, no? Everyone has an individual relationship with what they feel about Karna or Arjun or whatever. So anyone deflecting from that sort of thing would meet some manner of resistance. I think also partly the books are told in a way that is, the stories are old, but they're almost told in a way that is iconoclastic, that is, how should we say it, not typical. So it does cause people to wonder, but I think most people are open to having different suggestions put their way.
Okay. Now, for the sake of the audience members, I just want to add, if you haven't been able to view Amrita's artwork,
what would be nice is if Indy could cue some of the images on Instagram.
Of course. So if we can share some of the images that Amrita has produced, because it will give real context into the work.
The first one, the black and white one, will be Kari, my urban queer tale. It would be great if we open the gallery for that. The very first one here. That's right. Yeah. And if you just move past, you can see that these are, this is a story told with some amount of color, lot of references and love notes to artwork and things, allusions to literary things that I care about. But largely, it is a book that is gray, white, and black. It is not at all the way the later books were. And that makes sense for the kind of story that it is. It's an urban tale. It's a story about somebody's emotional landscape, which was rather gray at that point of time. It's also graphic. It's very much more comics in its sensibility. Yeah, this is my second book. You can see a great sudden departure from the way the book looks. If you scroll through, it becomes paintings rather than illustrations. It goes into full color. It goes into a lot of, it's surreal. It has references from art all over the world, ranging from Chinese propaganda posters to Matisse to Indian miniature paintings. It has also got a different treatment of pages. It's not so blocky and rectangular. There's an explosion of collage, acrylic paint. Many times the text says something and the images offer you a relief and a counterpoint. In other places, the images are telling you lots of things and the text allows you to step back and just breathe, If you go to my next book, the same kind of sensibility is taken 10 steps forth with the third book, Sauptik. Here, it's even more painterly in its treatment. Its desire to break out of the confines of a rectangle is even more acute. There is a lot of referencing that is happening to traditional iconography, but a lot that goes up, that is a departure from it as well. These are just some pages from that.
Incredible.
I haven't come to the last book yet, so I wouldn't talk about it yet. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, they are, sorry, Amrita, carry on.
So just to give you a note, this is my most recent book, which is called Aranyaka, Book of the Forest. It has a protagonist, which is a large woman, bodily large, of large appetite. And she is basically recounting a tale, which is a tale about seekers and learners and students and teachers. And also exploring some really, really vital themes, such as, is wisdom the purview of people that are in a classroom? Is the head the way to access sagesse, or are there other ways? Because Katyayani, the protagonist, her thing is appetite. She's hungry and she knows the hunger in others. So feeding others and feeding herself is her way of addressing and really seeing the other. Treatment in this book is very different. It's more childlike. It goes back to being comics. It also has a much more personal voice than the two books before it. Watercolors, more pellucid media that sort of fit with the theme of the forest. And when I say forest, I'm as much talking about the forest within as any forest around us. So it's a book about Vedic philosophy. It's intersectional. It's got feminism, ecology, these kind of themes playing with each other. My most recent book. We can exit the screen, which is sharing images right now. Thanks.
Incredible. So that gives some real context on the kind of the graphic and the artwork that goes behind these pieces of work. So what comes first, Amrita? Is it the writing or is it the paintings and the graphics?
Without doubt, it's the writing. Without doubt, it's the words. There are certain anchoring images, what I call nodal images, which I have always known will be in the book. Like, before I start doing anything in the book, I actually often have the cover in place. I have known the covers for all the books well before they were written.
Oh, okay.
And also certain anchoring images I have known, but everything else is led by the story. And it is a process that is what I describe as sculptural almost. So I often have a script running into 200 pages, which I whittle down into 45 pages of text that you're going to see in your work. So it's misleading. The lightness of text is definitely misleading. And it's meant to be like that. It's meant almost like poetry. You remove all but what is essential in your telling of the story. And the artwork plays with that.
Fantastic. So I want to touch upon your latest book that you mentioned. So you have a sort of a co-writer, co-distributor, contributor, which is Devdutt Bhatnaik, right?
Bhatnaik,
and so tell me, what was it like working with another creative? Did you have clashes? Did you work in synergy? Like, because it took you some time to complete this book, a couple of years, I believe.
All of them have taken lots of time, Priya. I took 8 years to write Adi Parva and Sauptik. Kari was probably the fastest because it was closest to the skin, so that its stakes are lower in some case. Working with Devdutt, it was an unusual creative collaboration because most people, when they see a double billing, they assume I am the artist and he's the writer.
Yeah, the illustrator and the writer.
Yes. It's absolutely not that. Sure. The more accurate description of this was that if a story is a human body, the spinal cord was what was created with Devdutt. And once that was created, all the rest was evolved by me. So the story itself, the universe, the characters, they were developed by me. And we had back forth about the detailing that is in the story once I had my stuff in place. He is a personal friend. He's also somebody whose own journey I'm very aware of, whose own becoming I witnessed a little bit of. So it was not a cold collaboration. It was a very affectionate collaboration, a very respectful collaboration, because we are both lone wolves. We are not necessarily, he's been collaborating much more recently, but we tend to work alone. And there was some beauty to both be reaching a phase in our life when we are willing to let somebody else in. So one of the key nodal points of Aranyaka is learning how to see the other. And what better way to do that than to actually work with another, to make something. I mean, it's as intimate as creating offspring, making of a book. So to write a book about seeing the other while working with the other, because we are as different gets, it was quite special. Was there conflict? Not conflict. A lot of discussion. Push-pull, yes. Agitation, no.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, excellent. So it was.
I think it helps to be philosophically walking along similar journeys. We are both, in our own ways, people that value wisdom, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So on that same note, what advice would you give to people that do work with other creatives? Because surely, there's going to be clashes in terms of, like, especially if there's illustrators and a writer. An illustrator might view the words differently to how the writer intends. Like, what would be your main kind of advice for someone going through that sort of situation?
I'm as loath to give advice about this as I am to give advice about people's love matches, Priya, because really, what do we know when we are trying to tell people that this is the best way to do something? I mean, it's a deeply intimate process. I think that it's probably even more intimate than marriage in some sense, because it's a very, I think that if it is not a relationship that exists before you start working, it is very good to create independent turfs and to respect the other person's turf. Because often you have an established writer that is collaborating with somebody that is probably not in a material way as well known or as wealthy or as accomplished as them. You need to give people a lot of room to work with. I think it's for me, one of the most oppressive things is to have somebody impose a very tight vision on me.
Sure.
So if you are collaborating, please be prepared to have a lot of wiggle room, to have a lot of room for fluid movement if you really want the work to contain the best of the other person.
Well, I've had the opportunity and the joy of watching some of your interviews and some of the stuff that Dev that has mentioned about you, and he speaks very highly of you, and he echoes the same voice as you.
We care about each other a lot, so yeah.
Yes, so it's great that you've been able to create this book together. So back to this book, like you touch upon so many kind of social issues, but it's set in a Vedic period, right? So you're marrying the present issues with past setting. Why did you choose this?
So it's not really set in a Vedic period. It has philosophy that draws from that epoch,
that era,
and in a sense, that philosophy is very it's very off the elements. Like in a sense, it resonates anywhere. I feel that actually Aranyaka is probably the most accessible of my books, other than maybe Kari, but even more so because really we are talking about fundamentals of human existence, preoccupations of all humans. We are talking about hunger, we are talking about competition, we are talking about fear, we are talking about desire, we're talking about people wanting to oust each other intellectually. We are talking about the fact that nature is the strangest kind of meritocracy in some sense. How the rules of man do not apply over there. So we are actually talking about very fundamental things. And the beauty of Vedic philosophy is that it is actually talking about these things. What are you worshipping? Well, you're worshipping the elements. You're not worshipping anything else. When you're done with your worship, you just level out your fire pit and you've left a plain ground again. So I actually find that it is very much in keeping with the elements. It's very, very earthy. And in that, because of that, it has the capacity to be universal, except that universally now we are all completely not grounded,
Sure. Yeah. So we've spoken about your books, Rita, and so I mean, before we go into this sort of second section of the interview, what kind of, where are you heading now? Are you do you see yourself more in the art field or writing, or are you going to still be combining the two going forward? Is there anything else in the pipeline for yourself?
The objective of all these things that I've been doing so far has only been one, which is to is to explore the fiber of life and to explore the issues that were of concern to me. I will do it in whatever beguiling and seductive fashion that I'm capable of. If that means using color illustrations, I'll do it. If that means utilizing some other way, I will do it. More text, yes. Less text, yes. Whatever it takes to have you not fall asleep on me while you're reading the book, essentially, right? So I see that my being is boot camped pretty neatly into the textual and the artistic. So in some ways, I will be involved with both always and always. In what fashion is not always very clear. So for example, last year during the pandemic, I started painting in large format. Now, these were big artworks done in acrylic. And I found myself... it was a very uncerebral process. And it actually was an Amruta that was much more coming from the lower intestine, from the heart, a child Amruta almost. And I found that my artwork has a way of speaking things that I cannot with my text, but I tend to be a little bit heavier with my text. So it will always be an amalgam of these two things. In what fashion will remain to be seen. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, you use different types of mediums in terms of your artwork, water, acrylic, pencil, charcoal. Now, who's actually inspired you as an artist in terms of other post artists? Is it a mixture? But is there someone that's really stood out to you, that's really kind of shaped your way of thinking?
At various points of time, various people. So, for example, although my books fall under what they call roman graphic novels in terms of where they are put in the bookshelf, I don't actually necessarily see myself as a flag bearer for comics or necessarily somebody that is inspired most by that medium. It's a great medium, but my own influences in terms of text come from literature, they come from nonfiction, they come from nature writing, these things. And artistically also, they come from really master painters. I'm very far from being anywhere in, not even in their shadow really, but influences come from there. So artistically at different points of time, everybody from Dave McKean to Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera, Rajasthani miniature paintings. There have been Odion Redon, Lorenzo Mattotti, all kinds of people really. And even in terms of textual influences, they have been ranging from Jeanette Winterson to the epics to John Steinbeck to Tarun Tejpal to like all kinds of people across.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, but you always, I mean, with your work, I feel like personally, when I've viewed your work or read your work, I almost get engulfed in this whole in another realm. It feels like I'm in another world when I look at your paintings or if I read your work. I do feel like it kind of takes you out of this world, really. So, do you have? Is that your purpose? Do you want to kind of exit people from their realities into your kind of Amrita world? Like, what is it?
Artistically, probably yes. Like, it's always playing. The text is very rooted. The text is not all over the place. The text is of the essence. It's talking about the essentials of life and pretty much nothing else, right from book 1 to book 4. So I guess the art offers you relief, like it allows you wings while the other thing puts down roots. I would hope that it is like that. That would be the desire, to allow you to take flight and to then come back and repose, or to sit by the lake a little bit quietly, or to dip in for a skinny dip.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So, what is it that kind of draws you to that nature aspect as well? So, a lot of your books refer to the elements. Earth, wind, fire, sun, rain, even animals. Why are you deep rooted even in your personal life? If I look at your kind of your writings or even your social media pages, you do have a deep connection with nature.
It's not just a natural park kind of nature. In Kari, for example, I'm connected with the topography of the city. So the effluents and the sewage and the rivers that are clogged as much as the pure nature that is there in Aranyaka. We are off this, no, Priya? I mean, I think like part of our problem, and in fact, one of the largest source of our problem is the fact that we see some sort of discrepancy or dichotomy between our lives and what happens with the animals, or what happens with the birds and flowers, like almost like they have nothing to do with us. So I think it is an urge to connect with that, and for sure it is a current that runs through all the work. All the first 3 books all had rivers running through them. The 4th book is unabashedly of the nature. It helps that I grew up in the state of Goa in India, which is probably one of the least assaulted, I mean, ecologically, one of the most pristine, beautiful places that you'd come across in India. And the fact that I grew up in a family that was outdoorsy, that actually being in the wilds or being in the open was very much a normal part of my growing up. I think that also left a permanent mark. It left a permanent sense of responsibility towards it, and also a permanent sense of wonder at being back.
Oh, amazing. I mean, so that's been a major influence in your sort of work.
It has been a major influence. I also lived in France for many years, where natural beauty quotient was very high. So it has been something that I've sought. It's not a matter of chance. I probably paid a personal price to be in these kind of forgotten settings. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, Amrita, which is amazing about your life, is you're not, loyal to just, not loyal is not the right word. You're not confined to one area. You've moved around quite a bit. So talk to me about your kind of the countries that you've moved to, and the influences that you've had through your travel.
Oh my. Priya, it's almost a sickness, no? The sickness of not this. Sickness of not this. What do you want? I don't know, but not this. So I think as a small town person, that was something that really played a very large role, knowing that I didn't fit in there. And I think some part of this mad running about was also an escape from confronting this torments, not as torments, let's just say confronting the storms inside. So you choose to run because it's just so stormy on the inside.
Right.
So I think a large part of the initial moving around had to do with the kind of, whether it was to do with sexuality, whether to do with just an unease, not fitting in, being a person that was a bit strange, culturally feeling not quite part with what was around. So some of that was internal for the early part. Later, it was just mad curiosity. It was a desire to drink at different lakes. It was a desire to see of different panoramas around me. Yeah. So it was that. And I think right now I've come to a point where there is a central axis kind of in place. So while I'm still very much drawn to the other, and the point is, once you have lived in too many places, Priya, you cannot entirely go back to anyone. You cannot. You've lost that passport.
Sure.
So I am permanently now what is called a Dhobika Kutta. I'm kind of not here, not there, in a Trishanku state, hanging between, different heavens. Okay. So that is a permanent state, but that doesn't cause me fear anymore. It used to cause me terror in the past. Now I know this is my state of being a bridge. I am not this city, I'm not that city, but perhaps I'm a bridge. that connects different sort of cities. Maybe I'm a honeybee that cross-pollinates, So seeing that as a role, I'm able to move between states and places with not such angst, but with greater control.
Sure.
Age has something to do with that.
Well, we've got quite a few attendees here, so I'd want to see whether anyone would like to ask any questions to Amrita. So if you want to, please do pop them in the chat box so we can get these questions to Amrita. But in the meantime, Amrita...
I didn't answer the second part of your question about what happened with the influences.
Yes.
So the first movement, the biggest culture shock was going from Goa to Bombay. Like really, for me, everything else after that...
I bet it was, yeah.
From small town Goa to glamorous advertising agency, Bombay was
looted the West. Yeah.
My move to the US for my grad program actually made me take my métier seriously, because till then I was just some kid who had studied advertising and was sketching on the side in a little stained ledger book, So I think that gave me some manner of assurance in a sense that what I was doing was real stuff. It was real art. It was some real pursuit. Indian upbringing can often make you doubt that whether you're really doing something legit in the world with art and comics. So there was that. My time in France taught me, actually it upped my game technically quite a lot. I did think that my art aspect was weaker than my writing aspect in my initial work. That changed in France. I worked my ass off. I was surrounded by people much more talented than me. And I think that the books show that, the influence, the coming into my body, really, that happened in France. And India, it's where one of my hearts is permanently abiding.
Well, yeah. Dean has asked a very similar question, actually, but you might want to add some take to it. So you're often working on your art in different countries and environs. How do you keep focused on the work, and do your different surroundings influence the art you're currently working on in some way? So obviously being in France, you're currently in Morocco, but your heart lies in India. So
one of my hearts lies in India. I'm like the giant that lives.
Sure. So yeah, what kind of influence? I guess, do we have any evidence in your work in places that you're?
But you can really see things better when you step away from them. Like I started working when I was in India. I was the average teenager that wanted to have nothing to do with wearing salwar kameez or doing anything that my parents did or going to yoga class. It was when I went to the United States that I started studying the Mahabharata. Wow. It was when I went to France that I actually completed 3 works that are deep roots in the country. Adi Parva, Soptik and Aranyaka were all done sitting in France, really, not off the soil. So what I took off France was the subtle stuff. It was by osmosis. And I think that the places definitely influence, but not in very obvious ways. So now I'm installed in India, but I'm working on a graphic novel called Sum of All Colors that actually straddles continents. So having stepped away from Europe, I'm now going to write the book that has Europe in it, or that works my life over there from it.
Sorry, carry on.
I think that I've always used places as hermitages. So I think being culturally removed gives you a certain sense of, a sanctuary, a sense of sanctuary, really, a grove almost.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay. So another question for you. This is from
Somanand.
Somanand, yeah. I would love it if you could expand. How do you see the urban space? Do you find city space as chaotic comparatively to Goa, which is not so chaotic?
I've had a changing relationship with this. I initially had a very strong knee-jerk to urban spaces. They just filled me with terror. Like if I went to a building that was 37 floors high, I deeply feared that I'd jump off the balcony. Like there was a very strange sense of terror in being in those spaces. Sure. Over time now, I have started understanding them as being almost like a spatial representation of psychology. What are people thinking? Why are they living like this? Why are they constructing like this? Why do some places huddle together their houses, other places sprawl out like women with large hips, so what is going on there really? And that investigation to me is a new one, and which I'm, in fact, even over here in Northern Africa, when I'm looking at the way things are constructed, what were people thinking? Why are they living like this? Geographically, how is the wind coming in and allowing you to breathe? So it's a changing equation. I'm more curious about it. I'm too much of a country bumpkin to be ever a big city dweller. So it will always be an outsider interest, and perhaps because it's an outsider interest, it may lead to interesting insights. Also.
Sure. I mean, it's incredible, because I guess the more you kind of move around, the more you kind of resettle in different places, it kind of adds to your identity. So, I mean, speaking from experience, I've had the pleasure of being able to move around, and it's absolutely correct. You end up taking some part of that place as part of your own. But it was very interesting what you said about when you moved from India. That's when you had more of an interest to Indian culture and Indian kind of tradition and literature, etc. I was exactly the same. I almost found my identity with Indian roots when I left my family home, to have that connection. That was very interesting.
Because the only way, you know how the old balances were, you put your vegetables on one side, you put your weight on the other. We are always weighing what we find new against what we already know.
Sure.
So actually it's a very natural grammar to suddenly go back to your own in order to make sense of what is new. So I see it as that.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. Absolutely. So how did it all begin with you? I'm going to take it right to the beginning. This is the second half that I want to talk to you about, in terms of you as a creative, you as an individual. How did you get to where you are right now? You wasn't always involved in the arts. You were more in ad copy. So your first job was in an ad agency, of all places. But you thought, no, this is not what I want to do. I want to go into art and writing. So tell me about that decision. How did your parents actually feel when you said, that's it, I want to...
My parents were responsible for me to study advertising, because like a lot of middle class Indians, they feel that at least she'll earn some money. They think it's kind of like the arts, but at least she'll earn some money. But the truth is, it's nothing. It's just its own thing. And I was not interested in it. So the minute I could duck it, I ducked it,
Sure.
I think how it started was by being a very, very strange child. Sometimes being a strange child, being an awkward child, unattractive. I've heard these stories from various people that have a strangeness of their own unique sort. And it allows you to really, I'm deeply happy that for example, the sexual awakening came very late for me. And I think that was great, because I used the time not to be Miss Popularity, but to develop an inner life. Or to develop pastimes of my own. Like, I know people that lived in lonely places that invented software because there was nothing else to do. So I think this business of being isolated or being deeply strange is a very, very great incubation place for doing anything different. And another thing that pushes me along is my friend laughs and says that it's almost like I was born in a snake pit. I'm suspicious of everything. I'm suspicious of the art world. So I don't want to be too much part of it. I don't like gallery setups. I look at it as an outsider always. So I think a deep and abiding suspicion of all clubs of any sort is one of the reasons why I'm what I am, for better or for worse. I do acknowledge that some of it is for the worse, but if you ask about origin stories of Wolverine or whatever, it's there. It's that.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of that decision to go into art, did you find it was a struggle at the beginning, being of your female? You were living in India at the time.
It's still a struggle. See, people like you to be specialized in something. Yes. When you do a couple of things well, nobody knows where to keep you, and they all treat you as somebody who's a bit jack of all trades. Not like art galleries saying, oh, but she's a writer. The literary sort says, but she's doing these books which are actually got pictures in them. So I think people love to keep you aside. And if you're not hyper specialized in one thing, it's the age of the specialist, not the generalist.
Yeah.
The Renaissance men and women, this is not their time, really.
Absolutely.
So I think it's still an awkward relationship. It's a relationship where I still prefer to bypass the middleman and, for example, sell my work directly via my Instagram site than go the whole schmoozy network. But I may need to play the game. I think it needs to be a dance between being suspicious and playing the game.
Yeah. Which one do you feel you enjoy more? Do you enjoy being more independent, or do you enjoy that whole networking and getting to know people in your field?
So I have what it takes to hustle for what I have already worked on. I will not shy away from the hustle. Some of my friends are so pure that they actually see me as being a bit blowing my own trumpet when the books are out. And I'm like, I have not run 40 kilometers to check out on the last 5 kilometers. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So I have hustle, and I can play the game. I can dress the part to say what I have to when the time comes, but I don't love it. I cannot make a profession of it. And honestly, ideally, I would much rather socially engage with people that are not doing what I'm doing.
Okay.
So it is a balance between doing optimum minimum and then checking out and having a life which is aside and apart.
Okay, so what's the future, Amrita? Like, what are you working on at the moment?
Right now, I am working on getting stronger with the artwork. Pardon me, I've got an allergy which makes me do unattractive things.
Okay.
But yeah, so I'm working on getting my strength as a painter reach levels where I can actually do what I intend to do and not just have surprise results on the canvas. I'm also working on a graphic novel which is now getting back to the personal contemporary space, which I had forgotten about for a good decade of my life. So it's tentatively called The Sum of All Colors. It is not a sequel to Kari, but it picks up from some of the threads that are left in Kari. It will look very different than Kari, but it is very much an exploration of the nowness of issues that are to do with, being a woman who is aging, relationship with art, relationship with eros, relationship with travel. So it will be about everything as the other books have been, but with a contemporary grounding.
Incredible. And will you be in India or where would you be in the world?
Oh, who knows? Who knows who's willing to take me? I led the cloistered life like a good girl for 2 years. So I'm quite willing to be on the road and invited as long as the pandemic permits.
Absolutely. I mean, how did it treat you, this whole isolation? As a creative, it must have been, I don't know, some people saw it as a haven just to have time just to work on their projects, but some people found it incredibly suffocating and weren't able to kind of explore. How did you find this whole period?
Truth to speak, Priya, a lot of the nitty-gritty didn't... a lot of the nitty-gritty basically looks like my life as usual. It was not that different being in pandemic. The only thing, I had situations going on with me personally that made it hard. But the seclusion itself, I think I'm well equipped for, although I very much do enjoy being out and about and now, engaging with the world. So It was okay. I do think that it gave me a stillness, which I didn't have before. The access that I was speaking of, unless I had a stay order put on me by the cosmos the way it was the last 2 years, I would have continued running around like a headless chicken. So that was good to have a stay order.
Sure.
It made the work sort of... I didn't write very much that year. I was not psychologically able to write, but just as well. I mean, who wants to serve from an empty pot? You need to replenish a bit. Yeah.
Do you what kind of, while we're concluding the session, what advice would you give to young writers and artists out there that are thinking about changing a career path? Because as you said,
what do you mean changing a career path? As in stop being something else in order to write graphic novels?
For instance, like typically being South Indian myself, parents are like, get a degree, if all else fails, get a degree. So, for instance, myself, I've got a degree in politics, but also in journalism, but my passion was through presenting. So, which is obviously through experience, etc. But,
you're good at it.
But, here's the thing. So if there was, once you've got that tick box, yes, I've got my academia, but I actually have a passion for acting, or have a passion for writing poetry, or have a passion for drawing daisies all day. What kind of advice would you give to somebody that just wants to follow their dreams and listen to that passion that's within them, just the same as you did?
Priya, I belong to that school of thought where I believe that if you need others to be doing that much holding for you, you're probably not going to do it. It's great to not have your wings cut and your limbs amputated en route. And hopefully there are enough adults, or at least that 1 or 2 adults, who will prevent you from becoming a basket case, which a lot of our upbringing can end up making us. But beyond that, I believe that there is just some fire that makes you do things for reckless reasons. Yeah. Nothing practical about this course. I will tell everybody, if it's not a love project, don't try to do a graphic novel. You're not going to be Marjane Satrapi. You're not going to make millions writing a graphic novel. Do it for the love of it. If you're damn good, if you're lucky and you're damn good, you might find success in your lifetime. Otherwise, consider that you have a date with history. But do it for the right reasons. And those are passion-related reasons, not reason-related reasons. Sure. At the same time, one thing that I learned probably a bit late because of middle-class guilt about money is that I always had a lot of shame about scaffolding properly on financial grounds. I would do it differently now. I would try to have a métier which had nothing to do with my writing to earn my money. And I would write in order to just be writing rather than struggle and do nothing but write. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So if there is some way that you can be grounded and practical and figure out a source of income, I would encourage that you do have that, because also it makes your life richer. If you're a doctor or you're a person on the field or you're a journalist, you have that much more to write about. I mean, live. If you don't live, what you're going to write about?
Yes,
and sometimes having another métier just allows you to do that. Have enough in on life aside from the slightly non-realistic world of writers and creative people.
It kind of cuts out that struggle, and you're able to just concentrate on the passion of that of the work that you do, so to speak. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, Aretha.
You have asked really nice questions, Priya. It's been a delight talking to you. Thank you so much.
I mean, what I love about your work is the fact that it's so recognizable. Like now, if I was to open up anything like a random book and it had some, and I didn't know it was by you, I would know it was by you, just the way you write, the way you draw, the way you paint. So
please tell your bookstores to stock my work. I don't know why England is so indifferent to somebody like me. You need to have books in your stores.
Exactly.
And it might help them to stop putting things on that tiny little shelf called South Asian writers. It is a writer who happens to have brown skin.
That's it. I know, right? Exactly. It's just a writer, of course. But you know what I love as well is the fact that you're so passionate and you're so kind of outspoken, you're so out there, and you're not afraid to say you're.
And I'm still in my 5 remaining photogenic years. Please use me.
But you're an inspiration to us, to all South Asian women. We need to see it to be it, right? So thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Desi Blitz, thanks for thinking of me. I don't know who recommended this, but it's been great talking to you.
Excellent. So I just wanted to mention this online literature festival has been produced by DesiBlitz.com and is supported by the Arts Council in England. And Desi Blitz, even speak from experience, has always been proactive in supporting arts and creativity. And you can find out more about how we do this, as well as details on further events by visiting DesiBlitz.com/arts. I'd like to say thank you to all the participants today and for your amazing questions. And again, Aretha, thank you so much.
Thank you all so much, including those that asked questions and invited me to the UK and said they enjoyed the interview. All of that. Thank you.
Absolutely. And please come to the UK. We can
and, when this menace of having Zoom meetings gives way to real life encounters, I'd be very happy to see you all. So inshallah soon.
Absolutely. Well, brilliant. Thank you again. And thank you to everyone. And we'll see you at another event. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck. Bye.